All right, students, we're going to start talking about Chapter 11 today, and we're moving to a whole new era. They call this the Jefferson era because Thomas Jefferson left such a huge mark on the country during his presidency. All right, so a new party comes to power. In the election of 1800, the Federalists support Adams for a second term, even though it didn't go so well for him the first term, but they go ahead and support him for a second term. And Pinckney is his vice president. You don't need to remember that, but you do need to remember Adams. And the Democratic Republicans nominate Jefferson again. So you're having sort of the same situation set itself up, except that both parties simply put two people up for a vote, not mandating one for president, one for vice president like they had before. I've got an electoral college map up there for you to see, and we'll talk about that more in the next frame. Again, we talked about this, how when you vote for president, you're actually voting for electors who then vote for president. So the candidate with the most votes becomes president. The candidate with the second most votes becomes vice president, and they don't run as a team. We've talked about that before, too. All right. So the election of 1800, the two candidates both got the exact same amount of electoral votes. And so when that happens, there's a tie. And in that case, the House of Representatives is tasked with selecting the president. And this was a tie between Jefferson and Burr, and poor Adams is left out of it completely. But that's not surprising because he had had those scandals while he was in office. And you'll see before I'm done with this screencast that it's not over. He doesn't leave office without having another scandal yet, which he himself causes, actually. So the House of Representatives is then tasked with electing or appointing, honestly, voting in the president. In the House, the Federalist representatives tried their best to keep Jefferson out because they don't want Jefferson. Like it says here in this bullet point, he had not been exactly supportive of Adams when he had been vice president, and he's the other party after all. And they figured even though Burr is a Democratic Republican, he's not a sneak and he's not a troublemaker. So they don't want the sneak and the troublemaker. Now that's my own interpretation. For 35 ballots, cycles of voting, hold on a second, I'm going to sneeze. Oh, sorry guys. Okay, so for 35 cycles of voting, that means they go at this for 35 times. The election remains a tie, and finally one Federalist defects and votes for Jefferson. And because they don't want this ever to happen again, the 12th Amendment says that electors have to cast one vote for president and one vote for vice president, so that this is not going to happen again. However, this does not eliminate the problem of two people having to work together who think very differently, which, again, you're going to see this causes a problem even still continuing going forward from, even into the 1800s. All right, Jefferson's inauguration. On the day he took office, Jefferson, oddly, you'd think he would want to dress up in your very best clothes, but he didn't. And he wore his everyday clothes. He wants to emphasize that he's supposedly just common person like everybody else, like farmers. And of course, that's not true at all. He's very wealthy, and he's a plantation owner. Now, it doesn't mean that he's against everything that he stood for, states' rights and smaller government and all of that. He's for all of those things. But he's just kind of like a lot of politicians we know today. He's not really telling us the truth about himself. Okay. Now, Adams didn't go to Jefferson's inauguration, and this is considered really, really in bad taste, even back in those days. But Adams just had his nose out of joint. I mean, he felt like he had just been shunned and dealt a bad deck of cards because he had not even been considered. And he didn't take any of the responsibility on himself. It wasn't like, oh, well, I wasn't the best candidate. It was like, I should have been president again. But at any rate, it was bad form, and he should have gone. But Jefferson outlined his goals in his presidential address, and he's for small government, he says. You're going to see as we go through this chapter that the best of intentions by even the best presidents sometimes just cannot happen. So he wants a wise and frugal government. Don't spend so much money. And he sets about, as he becomes president, to do this pretty much right away. He wants more states' rights, and so he goes about trying to set that thing up, even as he just first takes office. Okay, I'm not sure why my PowerPoint is out of sight of the frame on this. It seems to be, I'm sorry about that. It must have been a different format I was using. The most important information is inside the frame. So his Secretary of Treasury and Jefferson reduced the national debt by cutting down on the military. So they're going to cut the military and they're going to limit the number of government workers, cut back on government, cut the military. They think that they don't need a big military. That's not important for them. They can get by without it. And he does away with a lot of the taxes, which is going to make him very popular, and only keeps customs duties. That means things that are imported are going to be taxed, and that's about it. And sell the Western lands, and that's where the government's income is going to come from, selling Western lands and just those customs duties. Okay, and so now my thing is not in the frame. All right, well, I'm going to try to talk you through this, and I will post the PowerPoint alongside this, with this also, when I post the screencast. All right, so the Judiciary Act of 1801 is important. After the election, but before Jefferson takes office, the Federalists passed an act to expand the nation's court system. Now remember, the Federalists are not Jefferson's party, but they want to expand the court system. Adams uses this act to make hundreds of appointments during the last hours just before he left office. And these appointments are called the midnight judges, not because he actually made them at midnight, but because it was very close to the end of his presidency. And so they call this bunch of appointments that Adams made, the midnight judges. Now, they cannot take office until they get the proper paperwork, and a lot of them did not receive the proper paperwork before Adams left office. This is his final scandal. Probably he should have kind of waited until the new president took office to let that guy put the judges in place, sort of like President Obama did with the Supreme Court appointment, although that's just one judge. But seriously, he probably should have waited instead of scrambling to put all these guys in place. But he wanted to make sure he had his buddies in place, is what it amounted to. And so Adams asked Chief Justice John Marshall to serve as Chief Justice, and so the Congress is mostly still Federalist, and they approved most of Adams's appointments as quickly as they possibly can, but some of these guys don't get their paperwork in time. This is going to set up something that's very important, so you got to follow me with this. And again, I'm sorry about this thing, and I will post the whole PowerPoint in the same day that I post this thing, so you'll get the whole thing. All right, so this is very important because Jefferson's Secretary of State was James Madison, and he's supposed to deliver all of the leftover paperwork, the commissions, from the Adams administration. So Adams makes these judge appointments, he leaves office, all this paperwork's left over, and Madison, the Secretary of State for Jefferson, is supposed to make sure all these things are cleaned up and everybody gets what they need. But Madison is dragging his feet on purpose. One of these appointees who did not get his commission, his name was William Marbury. You can see his name in the frame. And he asked the Supreme Court to force the delivery of it. He's like, no, wait. President Adams gave me this judgeship. I should have it. I want you to force Secretary Adams to give me the paperwork that makes me a judge. The court says, we don't have the jurisdiction to do that. That's not our job. We can't do that. Marbury argued that there had been a law written that gives the court the power to force the commission. Okay, but the Supreme Court says that that law that was written is unconstitutional. Please pay attention. Up until this point in time, the Supreme Court had never, ever argued that a law was unconstitutional. That word had never been brought up. This is the point at which the Supreme Court gives itself the power of deciding if something is constitutional or not. The Supreme Court did not want to force itself to make Madison give over the paperwork. And so the way it got around this was, we're going to say that that thing is unconstitutional. That's how they got around it. Okay, this is inside the frame. Please look at the red. This ruling is the most important Supreme Court case in the history of the country forever and ever. Marshall established the three principles of judicial review: that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, that the Constitution must be followed when there is a conflict with any other law, that the judicial branch can declare laws unconstitutional and thus is the key check on the legislative and executive branches. This is where they get their power, folks. It wasn't written in the Constitution. They gave the power to themselves. So you need to understand that whenever, there's an argument that comes up about, well, the Supreme Court this or that, understand that they gave that power to themselves. And no one questioned them because they thought, well, these are very smart people. Of course, they must know what is right. All right, there's some other important cases that you're going to have to be responsible for, and we'll talk about them some in class. And some of these become important later on, not right now when Jefferson's president, but just so you have heard them and you don't have to memorize them right this second, but you need to be familiar with them. So these are cases that Chief Justice John Marshall was responsible for. McCulloch versus Maryland said that Congress does have implied powers and states cannot tax the federal bank. This becomes important because we're going to have continuing arguments over bank and no bank and who has the power to decide things about the bank. Remember, that's how we got political parties to start with. And then Gibbons versus Ogden says that the federal government overrules state laws in matters affecting more than one state. And you see my little parentheses, that means interstate commerce. Okay, that means in this particular case, one state was claiming that it had complete rule over a river and that another state could not run boats up and down it. Well, it's a big country then, and so if we have rivers, everybody should be able to use those rivers equally, and that's kind of what Gibbons versus Ogden was about. And the last and one of the most important ones that we're going to talk about is Worcester versus Georgia. This has to do with Native Americans, and you're going to see it with this one. The Supreme Court goes ahead and rules and says that states cannot regulate Native Americans and what we do about them, but only the federal government has that power. And you're going to see that when it comes down to it, when Andrew Jackson is president, he doesn't pay one bit of attention to this. He just goes on his merry way and does whatever he wants. And again, no one stops him. So these three cases are very important for later on. But right now, you just need to know Marbury versus Madison, and you will definitely have to know it for the STAAR test, and probably for high school, and probably for college.